golden age of hot rodding was really after the war, and all the GIs came back with this new pent-up technology that had come out of the war, Zeus fittings and Aeroquip lines, and a lot of technology that is developed out of the war. And they had pictures of their cars and pictures of their girlfriends. So in 1945, 1946, when the war was over and the GIs came home like Doane, they just followed their love, their pursuit. And that was the golden era of hot rodding, were the late 40s. And Hot Rod Magazine started in the late 40s. So Doane fit right into that because he was always a talent, an artisan, and an amazing mechanical mind. And anything he touched was better for it. So when he got out of the service, he went to work for SoCal Speed Shop for a little while, and I think he worked for a Ford dealer, but he was a Ford man all the way. Everything he had to be genuine Ford parts, whether it was the original body or the engine or the brakes. I think he had Lincoln brakes on the Doane Spencer Roadster, but he was very forward thinking, always had a very keen eye for design. Some guys are just like really good in technology, but Doane put it all together in the artistry of his brackets, and the artistry of everything he did had to be absolutely perfect. He would take an original car and just make it all the better. I met Doane in the 60s when I had a Cobra. And the early Cobras, little things would break, and I just couldn't wait to take it to Doane to have it fixed, because he would figure a bracket out that was like artistic and functional and pretty to look at. And they called him Mr. Bracket because on his Roadster, which is arguably the most famous hot rod in the world today, the Doane Spencer Roadster, if we could display that car with the body off where people could see the chassis, they would be equally impressed by the artistry as they are about the overall car, which is unique to Doane. He was the first guy to put a Duval windshield on the car. He bulldogged the front end, he squeezed the frame rails in. He ran the lakes plugs, because he used to run the dry lakes, through the chassis. And to this day, nobody's done anything as cool as that. I mean, it's just one of the features of that car. On the armrest, he had the radio controls. He could figure anything out and do it artistically, functionally, and uniquely done. The dash was beautifully done, full instrumentation, of course all Stuart Warner curved glass instruments. The engine ran magnificently. He built the beautiful little Nerf bar for the front. Everything he did was so perfect. So he put this car together starting in the late 30s and then kind of finished it in the 40s. And then that car has been in every state of the union. It's not like he just built some kind of show car. Because for Doane, it was as much the drive and racing as the build of the car. So Doane got it, and he heard about this Mexican road race, and he thought, now that's a cool deal. So he was re-engineering the car. If you look at that Doane Spencer Roadster and you see the way it sits, you'd swear that thing was on the ground just because it had the stance and everything was just so perfect. But what he did, the car has full clearance because he was planning to run that car in the Mexican road race. Ray Brock and Ack Miller built El Caballo. So hot rods, anything that would run the race was acceptable. But Doane was changing his street roadster into the Mexican road race car. And he was well into the process, but then along came the 55 T-Bird, and again, it was a Ford beauty, so he kind of put the hot rod aside. And then he was working with a gentleman by the name of Lynn Wineland. And Lynn was involved with Peterson Publishing. And Doane kind of gave the car to Lynn. I don't know exactly what kind of financial arrangement he had, but Doane still had ownership in that car. Lynn Wineland put a Y block in it with a blower because, Doane was always looking for the extra horsepower, so they worked together on this car. But then Lynn never turned a wheel in it. It never ran. So from there it went to Neil East. And Neil East was an old hot rodder and had some wonderful hot rods, and he developed the car, and he continued to use the car. And he owned it, I want to say 25, 30 years, maybe more. And everybody knew the Doane Spencer car. It's always been called the Doane Spencer car, never the Lynn Wineland car, never the Neil East car, never the Bruce Meyer car. It was the Doane Spencer car because it had his workmanship, and he's the guy that built it. So everybody tried to buy this car from him. And probably the most unique buyer was a fellow named Bob Morris, who lived in Santa Barbara. And he just kept putting money on the table and money on the table trying to buy this car. And Bob Morris was a man of taste as well. Finally, he just kind of gave up. And he built his own. And he built a car that was based on the Doane Spencer Roadster called the Nickel Roadster. And that is arguably the most beautiful build currently. It's 30 years old now, but it was the most beautiful build ever. Still today, all the bright work was nickel, and it's an amazing car. But there was an event called the Dry Lakes Hall of Fame up in Buellton, and I had just restored the Pearson Brothers coupe. And Doane knew the Pearson Brothers because the Pearson Brothers ran the Dry Lakes and Bonneville. And Doane came and admired that car, the Pearson Brothers coupe, which is a legendary car. And he said, Bruce, and he knew me, of course, we'd been dealing for years all the way through Hollywood sports cars and Chris Cord. I mean, everybody knew Doane. He was like God. And he said, Bruce, you need to own my Roadster. And of course, everybody needed to own his Roadster. And he says, I want you to own my Roadster. And I'm going, great. And I never gave it a thought. I was thinking like, that Roadster's long gone from him. The next week, I get a call from Neil East. And Neil says, Bruce, you're the guy. And I'm going, great, what's that? He said, Doane decided you should have his Roadster. And I'm going, you're kidding me. Because I thought that Neil owned it, but Doane still owned it. And he and Neil came to an agreement that I should be the next caretaker. Because at the end of the day, all I am, and all any of us are caretakers for these absolute jewels. And I'm the privileged caretaker, and I have now, I've owned the car since the late 80s. It's hard to believe I had the car. Is that 30 years? Oh my God. So it's 30 years, and we restored the car, and then in 1997, after my 10 years of becoming the greatest thorn in Pebble Beach's side and the greatest pest, I convinced these elegant classic car guys that they should have a hot rod class at Pebble Beach. And they relented. In 1996, I got a call, actually a fax from the organizer, and Lauren Tryon. He said, okay, Bruce, are you sitting down for 1 year only? Like, we've had enough of your begging. We're going to do it for 1 year, only historic hot rods, and thinking he's going to get rid of me with this. And so we brought the Doane Spencer up, and there were some great hot rods in the class. There were 8 historic hot rods in the class, and we won the class. And that really put the Doane Spencer in the limelight of a lot of hot rodders that had only heard the legend of Doane Spencer. So it won the first Pebble Beach hot rod, and it went on to win the Louis Vuitton and the Meadowbrook, and every car show I've ever entered that Roadster in, it's won, for all the right reasons. It's not about me, and it's not about the great restoration. It's a tribute to Doane. the genius, the guy that put this car together, and to this day, the most admired hot rodder of all time.
Doane Spencer, well, it was a very important part of my racing life. I don't know if he was my brother, my friend, or my father, or all of them wrapped together. But he was a wonderful man and a great mechanic. I first got onto him, I was racing on my own, just an MGA. Didn't have any idea what I was doing. I somehow went to Doane to ask him to put a cam in an engine for me. And he said, why? And I said, well, the car run faster, I'll get more horsepower. He says, no, you got to do the whole engine. You just can't stick a part in it, which was very typical of Doane. He got to the truth very quickly. In any case, I couldn't afford that. Time went on, and I finished the season in the MGA, but literally was out of money, and I was not going to race anymore. Somehow I'd become friends with Ronnie Bucknam, who was driving Doane's Austin Healey at the time, and transferred into an MGB. They were winning every race. A lot of people gave it the ability of Ronnie Bucknam, but we all knew Doane had a great deal to do with it. He was a hot rodder, and he was doing things to cars that nobody else was doing. Anyway, Ronnie hurt his shoulder surfing or something. And somehow Doane convinced Chick Vandergriff to have me drive for him. I will never know why. For a couple of races, which I drove for him, and somehow really got hooked in with Doane. And at that point, I was kind of standing around, and then Ronnie went off to drive for Honda in Formula One. Chick had several other people he wanted to drive the car, but somehow Doane wanted me to drive it. So I started driving for Hollywood sports cars in MGB. And that transferred into a lot of other cars, a Sunbeam Alpine, a Sunbeam Tiger, which was a great period for Doane and I because he loved the Ford engine in the Alpine. And I liked the car. It was a car that never should have won races, but it did over and over again, mostly because of the things Doane could do to it. See, the English cars came over here with very tame kind of engines. they didn't really hot rod them up. The Doane was with Bonneville Flats, and he did hot rod them. They would come over with, I think it was about 9-to-1 compression. He would jack it up to 10, 11, 12% compression ratios, which everybody said the engine can't live doing that. But he made them live, and we won a lot of races. Then it transferred into bigger cars, McLaren, Ferraris, and I drove some for Shelby and Ford and other cars that Doane wasn't on. But I always kept going back to him for the information and the input. Nobody could quite do it like him. I heard an expression a doctor said to me once about another doctor, and it fit Doane Spencer, and that was, there was no second. There was nobody in his league. Whether it was suspension, the engine, the whole package, he could do things that others just didn't do. And in a way, it gave us an unfair advantage. I got more of a reputation as a driver because of Doane Spencer. I never lost that belief in him. When I drove for other people in other cars long after Doane could not participate a lot, I was on the phone as quickly as I could get to it after a practice session or qualifying, asking Doane what I should be doing. People didn't realize it with him. He was such a good mechanic, but he was also very, very smart. Now, most people would say, think of smart related to college education, things like that. That was not it. It was just an intuitive intelligence he had about things, about everything. I spent many an hour driving back and forth across this country with Doane and his Ford and a car strapped on the back of a pickup truck to go to a race somewhere. And the conversations went all over the place outside of just mechanical and engineering things. And he was truly one of the two smartest people I ever knew.
My name is Ken Epsman, and I've been a car enthusiast since late 70s. Bought my first car in 1980, a GT 500 convertible. Along the way, I found out that I started vintage racing and became enamored with Doane Spencer and Doane Spencer's cars. And I have, along the way, I found this gorgeous Decon Monza that Doane built for IMSA AAGT series, and this 1955 Thunderbird that Doane built in the late 80s. That car started as when he 55, I suppose that he drove a Thunderbird every day and did all these things with it, and then took it to Bonneville and ran 148.5, held a C record for quite a long time. And then at some point started taking parts off of the original car, and he built a double trick throwdown car with disc brakes, with a Ford SVO motor, Jericho transmission, all the great suspension components, and had the old components left over. And somebody came in, this is a story I understand, someone came in one day and said, why don't we build a car out of this? So his name was Jim O'Mahony. The story goes that Doane told him, go out and find a nice chassis and I'll build you a car. I'll build you the car just like it was in 55 with as many parts and pieces as you see here. You cannot ask me how long it's going to take or how much it's going to cost. You're going to have to open your checkbook. So Jim O'Mahony opened his checkbook and ended up with this 55 Thunderbird. The car still has the original windshield with the original Bonneville sticker in it. The Bonneville timing tag is still on the firewall. The rear end that's in the car is out of a 57 Fairlane NASCAR, some kind of really good rear end. The headers on this car are absolutely gorgeous work of art. Everything under that car is a work of art, as is this car. the Thunderbird is a great car to drive. My wife and I use that for 1,000-mile trips. We do the California Millie and the Copper State and all sorts of tours throughout the country with this car. This car, it looks great, sounds great, runs good. Everybody looks at this 55 Thunderbird and says, that car is, I don't really like Thunderbirds, but that car is beautiful. I don't know what there is about that car, but it really looks different. I can't put my finger on what it is. Even we were at a Thunderbird car show in Santa Cruz a few weeks ago called Thunderbirds on the Wharf. And there had to be 80 early birds is what they call these cars. And all these guys know everything about these cars, and they kept looking at that car and couldn't figure out what it was. This car has big Lincoln front brakes on it. There's still drum brakes on the front. Thunderbird's on the rear. Handles great. When Doane built the motor, somehow this motor spins freely up to like 6,000, 6,500 RPM. These motors, these old Y-block motors shouldn't do that. As I understand it, he took the cylinder heads and changed the geometry of the valve train and unshrouded the rear valves so that it flowed really well. So the car just really runs well. It's a lot of fun. On this Monza, story on this is he built these cars, he bought the Monzas and then went to work for Chris Cord. Chris Cord had one, then he had two. And Doane did all the work, and if you look at this Monza compared to other Monzas, there's all sorts of really trick pieces and detail work that Doane did. The headers on this and the headers on the Thunderbird look really the same. You can't see any weld marks. Everything is just beautiful. On this car, he's got lines that run through the roll tubing, so you don't see where the lines go, how they come. Everything looks really clean. And this is a race car that they raced all the time. A story about this that I got from someone that was close to Chris was they got mad at Doane because the cars would show up at the track absolutely shiny, perfect, looked like they'd come off a showroom, but he was never quite finished with them. So they got a little, that was the one thing that they said annoyed him about him, but his work is just meticulous. This Monza has a lot of parts and pieces on it, like the door handles came off of a Ferrari. The outside door handles came off of a Ferrari. The shift boot is off of a Ferrari. Just the steering wheel and column is off of a Porsche. The seat's out of a Porsche. Just really incredible stuff. Motors were built in the old days by Fisher and Bart's. When I got the car, the Fisher and Bart's tags were still on the engine block. The car went to, after Doane got done with it, ended up with Chuck Kendall, that's Tommy Kendall's dad, and sat down there for years and years and years. Anyway, when I bought the car, the suspension was still set up as it was, still had the original shocks. Everything on it was there. The only thing I had to do was the intake manifold is magnesium, and I guess when they left the water in it, electrolysis happened and put a bunch of little pinholes in there, so we sealed it up as best we could, and I ran it. Just as I bought the car, we changed the oil, made sure it was safe, and I ran it at Willow Springs, and I could not believe how well this car drove after sitting for, 20 years. And there we go. Doane is an absolute magician, and a lot of the things he does to a car, you can't see them, but they show up in the drivability and the looks of the car.